You are peddling the dumbest, most, by the way, I hate to use this word, but cringe.
You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
All right, so Tim Dillon did an episode of his show where he pretty much just went in on JD Vance for his recent appearance on Joe Rogan. He spent a good chunk of the show talking about that, which I thought was interesting because, these guys shifting perception or not shifting perception of JD Vance is, I think, going to become increasingly important. So the fact that Tim Dillon kind of tees off on JD Vance here indicates that the rift is widening enough that even he is going to face serious questions over this Trump administration, or at least isn't going to be able to wiggle away and just be the next candidate. So we'll get into that a little bit more, but here is, just to start off, this is a part where he briefly mentions Trump's address on elections that he gave on Thursday night, where he essentially was trying to flesh out his claims that, elections were stolen from him or whatever. It was a big giant nothing burger, and that is kind of what Tim Dillon, fan of burgers, explains it as here.
We're all over the map here. Trump comes out yesterday and goes, the voting's all fucked up, but yet the Republicans won 2016 and 2024, and now they have the House and the Senate. They have all of those races they won, and they won the presidency. And he's claiming that the voting is the biggest issue. They genuinely, literally right now, have they have the Congress, the House, the House, the Congress, Senate, everything. Kind of most of the Supreme Court. Thomas Massey made that point. He's like, we kind of have all of the things we could want. And they're going out and going, the election was stolen. Now, by the way, I'm not saying there's no voting problems. There's probably voting problems. There's weird laws in California that let people show up to a polling station with a bunch of ballots, go, hey, my whole family voted, and here's what they think. That's weird. But Trump's out there talking about voting. He's the president. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard. He's like, the voting irregularities and the elections are stolen, but you're the president.
All right, so I want to highlight this because I think it's the proper reaction to this election stuff. Not only, are they mostly talking about elections that they won or times when Trump was in power. It's actually funny, the timeline that Trump lays out here, because apparently the elections that led to him being in office, the elections where he won, are elections that were held under Democrats, and the elections where they have all these problems that they're pointing to were held under Republicans. And obviously, under this theory, neither of these insane tactics that other countries are able to use to undermine our elections were enough to stop him from winning. And so what's interesting about this is he points to a lot of the same kind of things that people were pointing to about Russia back in 2016. And it was always true that there were more countries capable of doing that sort of thing. And that is really the extent of these quote unquote intelligence reports, is that there are vulnerabilities in the system, not that there's any activity taking place that actually would alter the effects of the election. And it's funny because intelligence reports that literally have those words were released in this dump of intelligence, that the votes that would be changed by the kind of flaws in the election system or the rare cases of fraud or people voting that shouldn't vote is not near enough to actually affect the outcome of an election. It's not structural enough, and certainly no outside country has the ability to structurally infiltrate our elections. So that is what is made clear in this recent attempt to get people talking about elections. Trump has failed at this over and over again, and it's interesting how his base really seems to lack an appetite for this conversation about elections. We'll see where it goes going forward, but even the Republicans don't really seem to go along with Trump on this. They're not passing this SAVE Act, which he wants them to do. And the last thing I want to say about that part too is when Tim Dillon says, there's weird laws in California, that's the perfect example of how this reactionary mindset works and how Tim Dillon and others, if you're wondering how Trump has advanced as far as he has, no pun intended, with these lies and with being such a fraud, it is because he can do all of this blatant lying in your face, and then people will still say things like, well, there are some weird voting laws in California where someone can vote up for his whole family, and blah. That's something that Tim Dillon has never looked up because it's not true. And once again, it was based on claims from Republicans that because of the law working a certain way, it is possible for a person to show up with 2 ballots. But when you actually look into it, there's no evidence that that's ever actually happened, and laws have been passed recently to prevent that. That's in the case of somebody receiving a mail-in ballot and also going to cast a ballot, which Republicans in California at one point were trying to claim makes it possible for people to vote twice, and yet even in the evidence that they're listing out, it is clear that election officials would eventually find that the mail-in ballot was somebody who had already voted and not count the vote. That's why mail-in ballots take longer to count. And there's this other thing about people collecting ballots on behalf of a certain number of people and turning them in, which is a practice in California. They passed laws in 2016 to make it so that you couldn't do that for money, so you can't be what they call ballot harvesting for money. And they made it so that the person who is voting has to have signed that this person is allowed to turn their vote in for them. And that's the kind of thing that they count when the election is actually held. So in all of these cases, it's literally just Republicans pointing to how elections work and saying, there's a problem with this, there's a problem with this. And again, even Tim Dillon is smart enough to say that in the case of elections that Republicans won, it really doesn't make a lot of sense to be trying to undermine the credibility of those elections, like specifically those elections, the ones that Republicans won. But anyway, here is where Tim Dillon gets into JD Vance's Rogan appearance. Not a lot of criticisms for Rogan himself here, but he does go at JD Vance, so here's that.
You're the president, and you ran on a platform of no new wars, and you're about to put troops on the ground in Iran. 1,000%, you are the president. Like, you're not popping shit from outside of the government. This is the thing when like JD Vance goes on Rogan and goes, well, you know, they have this whole discussion about the Epstein docs, and JD is like, I'll go to my death believing it was a larger conspiracy. You know, it's kind of like these guys are like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? It's like, no, you're the vice president. What are you talking about? JD Vance is talking about this like he's a guy at a bar in the town I grew up in on Long Island, where he'd be like, I'll always believe it was a conspiracy. You sure? That guy owns a pool company. He's gonna be like, yeah, what are you gonna do? I'll always believe someone on there. This guy's the vice president of the United States of America, going on the biggest podcast in the world, going, yep, I read all the files, Trump's innocent also. I'll always believe there was a greater conspiracy there. I'll always think something was going on. But what am I gonna do? I'm the vice president. That's JD Vance's character arc right now, is his whole entire thing is just telling people what the vice president can't do. Like, what about the war in Iran? He goes, you know, there's not much I can do. I just kind of hang out and, you know, watch as I'm part of the administration that betrays its voters and does the opposite of everything it said it was going to do. I just kind of hang out. And they keep trying to play this game where they're like this folksy, kind of like relatable, like, yeah, these fucking elites with they're fucking the kids, they're stealing your money. What? Who? You are doing it. You're the ones who are doing it. And they're relying on the fact that some of their most ardent supporters, the ones who aren't directly being paid off, are the stupidest people in the world. So that still works on them. They're like, yeah, fucking Hillary. Hillary Clinton. Fucking Hillary Clinton. They're in the White House. They have the Congress. They have the Senate. They have the Supreme Court. It is them.
The idea that Donald Trump could not have killed that legislation, especially with the United States Senate, is a joke. He absolutely could have killed it. What did he do? He actually said, nope, we're going to release these files. He thought, you know, he was annoyed by the story. He was annoyed by the Democrats accusing him of doing things bad. By the way, like, do I think there is any, I've never seen a single...
Stop it for a minute. He was annoyed that the Democrats were, can you play that again? That like...
Absolutely could have killed it. What did he do? He actually said, nope, we're going to release these files. He thought, he was annoyed by the story. He was annoyed by the Democrats accusing him of doing things bad.
He was annoyed that the Democrats were accusing him of doing things bad. It was annoying to him. Yeah, I mean, this is, again, the demographic of people that this appeals to or that this works on. I mean, I've met some of them, so I know who they are, and I'm not going to claim that I don't know them. I know some of them intimately. And it's not even JD Vance's fault. It is his fault, but it's not his fault that he's like a specifically terrible character. They're all in the mafia. It's just a mafia. It's a mafia family. I don't want to hear about the deep state anymore. You're playing me for a fool. You're playing everyone for a fool. You brought in Kash Patel. You brought in that other guy, Dan Bongino. You threw him out or he left, whatever. You brought in Pam Bondi and then threw her out. I'm sick of hearing about this deep state. All of these people, you have to be one of the stupidest people in the world to fall for this shit at this point. You are peddling the dumbest, most, by the way, I hate to use this word, but cringe. It's literally cringe. You watch this and you go, I feel so disgusted by the fact that they think people are still gonna believe this shit. Well, it's the deep state. It's the deep state. You guys covered all this shit up. Polymarket has it like that. We're like the odds to put boots on the ground before 2027 is almost 30%.
All right, so I left that part in at the end there just because it's an interesting note that he even is using Polymarket stats at all in talking about what might happen or what the likelihood is of this or that. I mean, a prediction market doesn't give you any type of accurate sense of anything. It's literally just what people think is going to happen. And also, I mean, Tim Dillon criticizes Peter Thiel constantly, and Polymarket is a Peter Thiel company. So, I don't know, seems like some kind of slick advertising there. There's really no reason to be reading out Polymarket stats on your show at all unless you're advertising for them, let alone to be saying their name. I loathe to even do it myself, but given that Tim Dillon is such a critic of Peter Thiel, it seems like that just seems a little fishy to me. It seems like he shouldn't do that. Like he should use a different prediction market or just say prediction market. But anyway, so getting to this JD Vance stuff, I mean, this is some of the most lucidity that you're going to get from any Republican on JD Vance, on the Trump administration and their way of going about this. But really what they're scratching and clawing for is a way to land back on the exact same ideological conclusions. They just want the next person who is either attached to this administration or likely not at this point, that is going to be able to re-describe or resell conservative ideas to them in a way that kind of pushes the ball forward and allows them to feel comfortable not going with the libs or the leftists. That's really all this is about, and you're getting some thrashing from people like Tim Dillon and saying things like, you got to be one of the stupidest people to believe this, and people who are smart are not going for this. I mean, this is what we've been dealing with for the last 10 years. Like, welcome to the party. I'm not sure why these guys are just now becoming lucid. It seems like they're only now becoming aware, and I don't think it'll last because, again, the misguided reactionary impulse to seek some other kind of truth other than what you're getting from a pretty secular scientific perspective, institutions that are meant to produce that kind of perspective. I'm not saying they're not flawed, but using elections for an example, it is an institution that is largely flawed, but because it was built on a secular basis and not some kind of like pseudo-religious basis that a certain team needs to win, or even to the extent that we have unbalanced our own election system to favor the minority, being Republicans, that is really what has corrupted the system and made it unfair, more so than the idea of who's voting and who's not, because again, they can never point to any evidence about that, and it's going to come back to that because that's the only thing that's going to save the Republican project at this point, is being able to try to invalidate people's votes and throw people off the voter rolls, etc. And I do think that narratives around immigration, around welfare and benefits going to immigrants, as well as immigrants voting in elections, trying to tear at those institutions narratively from a right-wing perspective is what is going to allow these guys to get back on board. And it kind of, all they're really saying is that we need somebody who's not attached to Trump now. We need somebody who's not attached to the Trump brand. And it's interesting that how this whole kind of thing works, because Rogan has JD Vance on, asks him some questions, doesn't press him really on anything, definitely does not have an adversarial conversation with him because he's just like not allowed to do that at this point. And then Tim Dillon immediately comes out with the criticisms. So these are all the criticisms that Joe Rogan could have made to JD Vance's face. He's been a lot lighter on his criticism, even on his own moments in his show without a politician in front of him. Joe Rogan has been pulling his punches, doesn't really have a lot of punches for the administration. Tim Dillon is teeing off more, which shows that he's the one who's willing to distance himself more from this administration. But again, I mean, what does that mean? It just means that when Thomas Massey or the next Republican is trying to sell themselves as someone that allows you to hold on to your reactionary, racist, and non-class focused issues, present that to your audience of hundreds of thousands of people and keep the train moving. And if they got to throw Trump under the bus, they'll try. And if they got to throw JD Vance under the bus, they will. I think they'll be a lot more begrudging about that. But ultimately, they're keeping hold of their reactionary project. And that's why the answer in American politics is to move beyond this, not to capitulate to it. So here, as a final example of that, just to show you that Tim Dillon is somebody who's very smart. He's capable of almost getting it, but he still doesn't quite get it because his critique and what he actually wants to see the government do is just not in the right place. So here's him talking about RFK Jr. just for a second.
RFK and Cheryl, did you see this? He's like fighting a yak. This was the guy who was going to try to help the food. The food's as bad as it's ever been. That was all fake, by the way. He was going to look into all of the vaccines and the food. He didn't do any of that. It's fake. So he's like on some summer vacation with Cheryl and some yak. He's just like on his Instagram, something like, he's like, we did a 10-mile hike up the mountain and I saw a yak. And then I pushed the yak with my phone and it ran away. And you're like, hey man, weren't you supposed to ban the big gulp or something? They've done nothing, but all they could do is just move us to European standards on the food. They've done none of that because the corporations, Trump's a junk food addict. It's the junk food presidency, and all the people that own the big food conglomerates, they're like, well, no, you're not banning shit. They banned one dye, this one red dye. So none of it's getting fixed.
So here's where, it's like he's almost getting it, but he's just not going to get it because there's a reason that RFK Jr. is not doing anything. It's actually easy to see. It was easy to see from the beginning that RFK Jr. wouldn't do anything. And it's not just because, Trump is a liar and it's all always lies. That's part of it. You got to be able and willing to lie in order to align yourself with Trump. That should be pretty clear to anyone by now. Yes, you could say the same is true for any politician, but with Trump it's different. And that's what Tim Dillon was saying about this mafia family thing. Again, this has been clear about the Trump administration for the last 10 years. People are just kind of realizing it now. Good for them, I guess. But when it comes to RFK Jr., specifically, the Trump administration and any Republican administration is going to be anti-regulation. They don't regulate. He's in favor of wielding state power to kind of like intimidate corporations or give them what they do or don't want in terms of mergers or whatever. But they don't use antitrust and they don't go after actual regulatory systems because fundamentally this whole Project 2025 thing that you guys let into the gate it's just anti-regulation. It's anti-administrative state. So the only aspect of government that would make it possible to prevent companies from poisoning our food for profit is the administrative state. That's why it's there. Again, it's not to say this institution is perfect, but it is an institution that exists not for profit, but as a public good. And that is different from anything that any capitalist, regardless of how much of a genius or how benevolent they're supposed to be, they will never do things for the public good. And that means they are always willing to poison you. And so it should have been a red flag that the guy saying he wanted to rein in the poisoning of those companies, noticed that he stopped talking about the companies doing it. And he was talking more about, they're poisoning us. And they're trying to turn it into a government conspiracy, like the government is the one poisoning you somehow through their regulations. The regulations are where the poison comes from. That's the trick. Rogan does that on his show constantly. Tim Dillon is confused now at the nature of the Trump administration because he did not because he refused to see that lack of willingness to attack Capitol, something that Republicans will never do. Even Democrats barely do it. We're fighting to make it so that the Democratic Party is a party capable of attacking Capitol and clawing back wealth, preventing them from doing things that poison people or enslave people, in the way Tim Dillon would probably like to put it. So, I mean, that's what the left is. And because they don't want to deal with the fact that the left is the one that actually has a critique and has ideas for how to tackle things like this, they want to make caricatures of what left-wing ideas are or what the law is. And, you know, will continue to be an audience for it, but I know for Tim Dillon, his audience, certainly in the MAGA Republican world, is going to dwindle, because they're 100% going to vote. They're 100% going to side with Trump over you. You know, they're not compelled enough by you that it's going to meaningfully change Trump's momentum within the Republican Party. How that's going to translate to electoral power and his leverage over time, I don't know. But don't expect Republican voters to be jumping off the Trump train anytime soon.
I'm in the pocket, and they know they can't slow it, can't stop shit. How the game so cold, so toxic, can't drop cause they're in somebody's pocket. For me that's not it.